Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our LIU LearnOn webinar series. Today, we're going to be focusing on Zoom, tips and tricks, safety and security. Um, you'll notice that we're actually not in our webinar room where we normally hold things. Instead, we've created this room for you today just because we wanted to be able to talk a little bit about some of the different features that are different in a normal Zoom room than they are in a webinar room. So you'll see that, those of you that have attended any of our sessions before will notice that you have the full control. So you have things that say chat, you share screen, things like that. Whereas you do not always have that when we're in the webinar room. There you have the Q&A pod. So my name's Ben Smith. I'm right here in this list. This is the group that's bringing you the LearnOn content. Been a tremendous collaborative effort for us to work together using Zoom to be able to provide you with all of these services. So we're a small group, and you guys can actually see the size of the group today because of being in a regular Zoom room. And so really the webinar outcome, it's just really one, I want to make sure that you know how to use Zoom in a safe and secure manner, that you're ready to sort of take advantage of all that Zoom has. So please don't hesitate to put things into the chat if you have questions. I have muted everybody, but you are able to, you should be able to unmute yourselves if we need to. We can do that, but right now, I don't believe you're able to unmute. That's one of the settings that we'll talk about. I did put in a how-to on the best practices, and you'll see that we'll post this document, and actually I'll click over here so that you can take a look, and then I'm gonna drop this into the chat. So that's the best practices webinar, and this is the slide deck. So as I post those into the chat, you'll be able to get access to those two documents. The best practices document is really just our document that allows us to share with our staff what are the best practices for using Zoom. So as I go in, you'll see there's a nice table of contents, and a lot of what I'm going to cover in this meeting today is covered in there. Now, one thing that you may already notice, if you have a most up-to-date Zoom, the links that I just put in, you can't actually just click on them. You're going to have to copy and paste them out if you want to be able to use those links. So, but we'll talk about that in just a moment. All right, so with that, again, ask any questions you might have in the chat, and as we get closer, I'll unmute everybody and allow you to talk through and ask your questions. But as you go to start up, what you're going to see is that in the startup screen, you're going to you'll typically see this when you open up Zoom. This is the window that you see, and it talks about like what the name of the topic is. And so I call this my personal meeting room. There's my name, there's my invitation, and you'll see that there's this copy URL. That can be really handy because when I copy the URL, I can then paste that out to anybody. So if I click on that, that allows me to get to that point. But then you also have a couple other buttons. And one of the things that I would encourage you to do is to click under Invite Others. And when you see Invite Others, you'll have a chance to see some of the screens. And I'll come back to that in a moment. But if your screen doesn't quite look like this, then here's the big thing that you want to make sure you do. And that is you want to keep Zoom up to date. So we're going to talk about security. And one of the things that Zoom has done is that Zoom has done a great job of really making sure that folks work safely and securely. And so you may think, well, really, like I've read about all these different issues that could be with Zoom. And while that is true, what is also true is that Zoom is able to quickly and proactively work towards making sure that things get updated and are safe. And so when I say that, what I'm really talking about are this type of thing. So what you could do is go right here to Zoom and actually right here, check for updates. Okay. And so if you go to, those are the two places that you'll see. So I'm on a Mac. And so when I go up into that zoom.us, there's preferences and check for updates. Those are the two places you're going to want to go. If you want to make sure you're up to date, you can just go to check for updates and you'll see where you are. And you can see, when I do that, I'm going to be on the latest version, 4.6.11, and then this is just the build number. But this information is really important because if you're not on the most up to date, so as an example, if the links that I put into the chat are clickable for you, then you're not on the latest update. Now, having said that, Zoom is always updating things. And so, so as a part of that, give me a second here as I clear all my drawings and move me back to the mouse control. There we go. All right. So so I went in and checked this morning, and Zoom is about to release another update. You'll see that it says April 19th. And so when I look at my watch, I'm like, it's the 20th, so they're not there yet, but it's going to re-enable clickable links in the meeting chat. That's just one of the things that's going to happen. And so, so again, as I go back, if you always read the release notes, you'll see what things they've made changes to for what's happening. And that's really important, so like, wait a minute, it looks different or something else happened. You can keep up with what's going on there. Now, I mentioned about inviting others. So when you click on that inviting others button, what you're going to see is that you're going to get something that comes up that says contacts, Zoom rooms, room system, and email. At the bottom of the screen, so down here at the bottom, what you're going to see is that like right there, you're going to see that you can copy the URL or copy the invitation. So if you're in a Zoom meeting and you want to send it to somebody, like they're in the wrong place or they didn't know where to go, that's where I can go, is back to that main screen, and I can hit that copy URL, and then that will come up for me. And so I would just, this is another place that you could sort of go through and check on the Zoom rooms or the email and the contacts. The contacts will have a list of a lot of people who generally come into your meetings or you've been meeting with. And so it's an easy way to go back and sort of find them. So the other thing that hopefully you saw is that when you tried to join this room, you were put into what's called a waiting room, and I have customized that. You notice I have my little STEM logo on there. It tells you that it's my personal meeting room, and the meeting host will let you in soon. So I also added the thanks for your patience, I'll be there in a moment, because what happens is when somebody tries to come into the meeting, I want to make sure that they have like that moment where they know at least I should be letting them in. This is another one of those security features that Zoom has enabled, and it's enabled for all their pro accounts so that when somebody goes to join your room, you have to let them in. Now, in this case, and I can see the names of the people that are in here, and we do have somebody named Amy who's in the room. But as I look at the list, I don't really know any of these people, and so you have to, if it weren't this webinar, I would be like, am I really going to let them in? And so, and if I do let them in, I want to be prepared to remove them right away. So that's just one of those things that you want to think about in terms of how you conduct your meetings. So now I want to jump into a little bit more on some of the tips and tricks here, and then we'll come back to security in a few moments. So one of the things that happens is that when you're in Zoom, you can look at the gallery view, which is sometimes called the Brady Bunch view. For those of you that are old like me and recognize, the little Brady Bunch, when they used to come on and they'd have the 9 pictures of the 3 kids and the 3 kids and the parents and Alice. Well, that's the Brady Bunch view under gallery. Under speaker view, you're going to see that speaker view comes up and it has the tiles at the top, and then it just has the person who's speaking in a big screen at the bottom. Now that's fine when you're just meeting and you're talking to folks like this, but if you're doing a screen share, And generally the window that's large is my screen. So what should be large here for you and is in this location here, right there, should be the Zoom room. Now, if you said, no, yeah, I want to see Ben up big, then what you can do is if you click on like my little tile that's right there, if you double click on that tile, it should swap the two views. And now I am big and the content is small. And if you want to get it back again, just double click and it should flip flop for you. The other thing that I wanted to point out is that this is the full screen window. And so if you're on a Zoom call and you're like me, I often am multitasking. So even though I have the Zoom up here, I might have my email or I might have notes that I'm taking or things like that up side by side. And so when the screen sharing goes in, for some folks, if they have the setting, it automatically fills the screen. What you want to do is then you want to hit escape and it'll shrink that window down for you. But if you do want to go back anytime to the full screen view, you can click on that. Now, the other thing is that when you're in this speaker view, sometimes there might be a reason why you have somebody else, and you can see I have Nicole down here, that I might want to pin the video. So if I pin the video, I can just click on those three dots. So you'll see on any one little tile, you can see there's three dots there. When you click on that, you can, first of all, go down and hit the chat button and send them a private message. So for some of you, if you were chatting with one another, I wouldn't necessarily be able to see that. But pin video will pull that video to the front. And so sometimes there's something happening and I'm thinking about, again, if I'm working with students, like if I wanted to see that in the large screen, that's what I would do, is I would pin that video. And then you can go back and you can click the three dots and unpin the video as well. Now, one other thing I wanted to talk about was the view options. So right now, because I'm sharing my screen, you'll see view options. And if you were to choose side-by-side mode, and if you don't see that, I'll show you how to get side-by-side mode. But if you choose side-by-side mode, what's gonna happen is it's gonna give you a little bit different view of things. And so, so that view of things is going to look like this. Oops. So it's going to look a little bit like this. And what's going to happen is this is side-by-side view where I have a slider here that I can drag over and back and forth so that I make these windows bigger or smaller and the content bigger or smaller. So you can see there's a screen share going, and rather than being in sort of the view where I have the tiles at the top, I have the views here on the side. This also can be really advantageous if you have two people sharing their screen. So you can see the two different views that look here. In this view, I'm sharing my screen down here, and then I have the little tiles at the top. Over here in side by side, I have the screen sharing, and then I have these two pieces. So that's one of those things that you can sort of go through and take a look at, okay? I find the side-by-side view really helpful, and I could actually go to speaker view. And if I go to speaker view there, then what's gonna happen is I'm gonna have my content, I'm gonna have my speaker, I can adjust them side by side. And if you have a big monitor, you're really gonna be able to get a good size. And so I especially think this could be helpful if you have an interpreter or somebody like that, or you really need to see the person who's talking, and that way you can get a good, clear view of them. So the other way that you can do this is that you can, there's a setting that will allow you to actually have two windows. So if you click on the setting that allows for dual monitors, then you'll see I get two windows. So here I have my window where I have my side-by-side sharing going on, right? But I also have the speaker view. So this can be really helpful for when I want to have the person be even larger than that. And so I actually have two views. So what you're looking at on this screen over here, so if I draw, you'll see like there's a lot of space over in this space here. Give me 1 second here. So like over here, there's a lot of things are not cooperating. So over in this area here and here, there's a lot of space. And that's because I popped that window out into a smaller window right there, okay? So that just gives you a chance to look at those two different views that you can have, again, side by side or dual monitors. All right, the other thing that I wanted to point out is that typically when you hit the chat button, it sort of extends your screen and it cuts off the one window and it brings the chat up to the side. One thing that you can do is that if you go under the three dots, or you go up to the top, you can actually pop out the chat so that it sits as a separate window, and it's going to float over top of everything that you have there. But by popping it out, it allows you to keep that chat window maybe off to the side. So for me, I like to pop out the chat so that it's on the side. The other thing that you can do is at the bottom of the chat window, when you are the host, you can go down to the bottom and you can see where you can change the chat. So right now I have the chat enabled so everybody can chat publicly and privately, but I could turn off the chat. So if I were working with students, for example, I would probably put either no one or the host only. So if I'm the host, I just want them to be able to message me. I don't want anybody else to see it. And by checking that button, that allows you to really save that information for yourself. The other thing that you can now do is that you can now upload files. So if you're working with students or teachers and you have a file that you want to share with them, you can click on the file button and you can share that in the chat. And so when I think about like that, I can actually go and click on the file button. And in this particular case, if I wanted to share some type of file with you, I could do that right now in the chat window. And so just thinking about that, I'm gonna pop an image in there, which is just my photo. So like there you can see like I put a file in the chat and now you would be able to download that picture, okay? So that's another thing that you can do. You can also pop out the participant piece, and you might think, well, I don't really care. Like most of the time I don't have the participant list open, but you do want to think about the fact that you can make some important changes. So for students, a lot of times when the students join me in my Zoom room, they'll put in just one single name. And of course I could have like 3 Jamies or 4 Caitlins or something like that. And so what I want them to do is to be able to rename themselves. So I was just in a meeting yesterday, actually on Saturday, where it was a board meeting and it was brand new. And so we had people with different positions and titles. And so what we did was we asked them to go into the participant tab, go over to more, and then rename themselves to add the little bit of information about where they were from or what their title was. And so in this case, if you wanted to practice that, you can do that now. You can change your name and rename yourself. At the bottom of the participant window, I also wanted to point out there are these little check boxes. So yes, no, go slower, go faster, more. So what I'd ask you guys to do now is just, if you can see that yes button, go ahead and check the yes button or the no button, or you can tell me if you want to go slower or faster in this particular webinar. So I just ask you to try that out by clicking on one of those little buttons. So again, to get to that, you have to hit the participant list, and then down at the bottom, you'll see these little buttons here. So if you're watching now and you want to, you can go ahead and just click one of those buttons just to see. And then, so I see Amy, first of all, Amy changed her name and she clicked a little check mark for me. So that's helpful. And then what you'll notice is I have a clear all button so that a couple people have also checked those buttons. This can help you with students so that they remember, even though you may want them to chat, and people are always like, well, you know, like if I had a class of like 20 students, I wouldn't want them to all type yes in there and try and figure it out. This gives me a very clean way to look and see what's happening there. And then when I'm ready to, I can clear all those. So I cleared them for you. The other thing that you can do is that when you're the host, you'll see below that row of buttons is something that says invite, mute all, unmute all. So like right now, if I like very quickly, if I wanted to mute everybody, I could just click on the mute all button and then everybody would be able to mute themselves. But you'll also notice that under the more tab, there's allow participants to unmute themselves. So if I have kids in the room, or I have a large meeting room, I may not want everybody to unmute themselves. So in that case, I'm just going to click on that checkbox, and that will, if it's checked, it allows the participants to unmute themselves. Right now it's unchecked, so you should not be able to unmute yourself and talk during the webinar. And what you'll also see is individually, I'll see little buttons that look like this besides the names. The microphone means that they are, if it looks like that, unmuted. It has the red slash through it like this, it'll mean that it's muted. So video is off. So right now everybody has their video off and they're unmuted. So those are ways that you can quickly, control the room that you see there. So, somebody has the dog barking in the background, or the doorbell rang, or the phone's ringing. These are ways that you can quickly help yourself to control that part of the webinar. So just keep that in mind as you go through, and again, allowing participants to rename themselves. That might not be something you want if kids come in, because as soon as they figure that out, again, they may decide they don't want to behave properly there. So now let me go back and talk a little bit more about security. So when we think about security, one of the other things that you can do is that you can lock the room. So in your toolbar, you'll see that there's a little security tab. Now, this is when you're the host that you'll see this. And so, one of the things I can do is I can lock the meeting. So if I wanted to, let's suppose I'm having an IEP meeting or a parent meeting, or I have another meeting, I can lock the meeting. And when you lock the meeting, you'll get this message that says you have locked the meeting, no one else can join. So then you don't have to worry about somebody else coming into your Zoom room while you're meeting with them. And of course, even with the waiting room, sometimes you see this like, so when you guys joined, you should have seen something like this, right? The message that said you were waiting. What I see is, well, Nicole wants to join my room, I can admit or remove her. And so if I choose to admit her, that's fine. The piece that you'll see here, where she's entered the waiting room, that will come up right away. But when that disappears, and you're like, okay, so what do I need to do? What you want to do is you want to make sure that you also have your participant tab open. So that's what another reason to have that pop out open is, because I want to be able to see if somebody else is trying to join, and that's where I let them into my room. And this helps prevent what we were calling the Zoom bombing. So if you had heard about this, some people were coming into rooms and they were posting inappropriate content or talking and saying rude things, and perhaps even sharing their screen and showing pornographic images. These safety securities have prevented that from happening. And the reason why that was happening is that you have essentially a 10-digit code. So when you came into this room, it's something, it's 10 digits. Well, you could just try and guess at room numbers, and that's what people were doing, is they were trying to guess at room numbers and get into rooms. And so if you can get into a room, then if they don't have their security settings, they were able to post information. That's no longer really the case with the new updates to Zoom, and this is why you want to keep Zoom up to date so you don't run into those types of problems. The other thing that you can do is that when you're the host, I can click on any one person, and then I can click on this More tab, and you'll see. So let's suppose students are sharing their video. I could stop their video, right? So if I go back here, like I could click on stop their video. If I have another teacher who's in, I can make them a host. And I do this a lot of times when I have large meetings. I'll be like, hey, Nicole, I'm gonna make you a host. And so I would click on make her a co-host. And the reason why I would do that is so she can let people into the room, she can remove them, she can mute people. And so if you have grade level partners and you're teaching with Zoom, this is a great thing to do, is to make another person the co-host. So those are all things that you want to be able to work through as you go through and think about the security piece. When I think about the screen sharing can be a great tool. Now, I've already done this not great, not really that well here, but there's a little annotate button when you are sharing your screen that allows you to mark up over top of the screen. So if I try this one more time here, I can draw on the screen so that others can see things. So, you know, and I'm using a mouse. So if I were really good, I could like write in my formulas or whatever else, or I could use stamps. So I can use stamps to be like, click here or click here. You can try and spotlight things. There are a whole set of tools. And what I would encourage you to do is to join the room and then share your screen and then play with those tools. You don't have to have anybody else in the room. You can still go through and use the tools. And then there's a clear button and it says clear my drawings or all drawings or other drawings. And so you can have other students. I can also give you guys the right to annotate my drawings, okay? So, you know, I could be asking you like, well, where would you click? Move your mouse along. And so you can control those things as well. What you'll also see is that multiple participants can share simultaneously. So think about this, like I might have the directions up, but I might have a student who wants to share their work. I can have 2 screen shares going on at one time if I click on the multiple participants. So you click on the little arrow and multiple participants. And if you click on the advanced sharing options, you'll see here, like who can share. So again, if I'm working with students, I'm gonna say only the host can share, right? That's gonna be one of the things I'm gonna do. Only I can share my screen. I don't want kids to be able to share their screen and see things. I also wanna be able to make sure that somebody else can't stop my sharing. So you can see it says who can start sharing when someone else is sharing. I just want it to be me as the host. And that's another reason why a teacher might be the host, a co-host with me. All right, so the other thing that you can do with screen sharing is that you can do a whiteboard. So when I go to share my screen, you'll see at the top, you usually have to pick the window that you want, right? And so as you pick the window, and you know, I'm only showing you one window open on my screen, what you may not have noticed is that there's a whiteboard and there's also an iPhone via AirPlay and an iPhone via a cable. So that means that if I have my phone, I can actually use my phone to share my camera or anything on my phone. So if I were demonstrating something on my iPad for students, Zoom is a great way to do that. And then I can share my screen. And I'll do this at the very end where I'll come back and I'll share. And actually, you know what? I can do that now. I'll quickly share my iPhone. So I have my phone. I stopped my screen share, obviously, and so you can't see that. And so now I'm going to click on share screen, but I'm going to hit iPhone, iPad via AirPlay. And so, so now when I do that and I hit share, it's going to call up another window, and there was a Zoom update, unfortunately, and so I'm going to not be able to share it that way. So I'm going to go back to my my main window. So it's asking for another plugin, which is often the case. And so just another case where you want to test it out, although it worked yesterday, but I updated overnight. And so, so when you do that, what'll happen is you're able to share your screen, and then I've used that as a document camera for myself. So I mount my phone up and then I'm able to write on paper and show that off. When you go to the share screen, if you click, by default, it's on basic, but if you click on advanced, you can actually also connect a second camera or a portion of your screen as well. So there are just some different options when you go to share your screen. Now, as we go to sort of come to towards the end, I'm gonna run a poll here. And so I created the poll ahead of time, and I'd ask you guys to take a moment and just vote on one of those tools or any of the other tools that you see. And so I popped up the poll there. As I talk here for a moment, what I would say is that you can click on the polling tool, but it's going to take you to a web location where it's going to ask you to enter the title, the question, and then whether it's single or multiple choice. Okay. So if you guys, if you have a chance, you can go through, and again, you can enter that poll information. I'm going to continue on. When you're ready, you just add a second question. Um, you can also use breakout rooms, and breakout rooms, as a couple of you are starting to vote now, the breakout rooms can be really helpful. So we're in a meeting here where there are 7 people. I can create breakout rooms, and the breakout rooms um, will the breakout rooms will allow you to set up essentially separate Zoom rooms that you can put students into. And so I'm going to just show you what it sort of looks like. When you click on breakout rooms, you'll get a list of how many rooms you want. And so what I would put in, if I put in 2 breakout rooms, um, I can then rename the room. So I can be like, okay, here's the Bluebirds and here's the Robins, or here's this subcommittee and that subcommittee, or here's my ELA breakout room and my math breakout room, okay? So I ended the poll, at least that question. I'm gonna share the results so you guys can see those results coming up for you. So the poll results can be a great way to get formative assessment built right into Zoom. But for the breakout rooms, you can then assign students in there. And when you click assign, it's going to allow you to pull a student in there. But you can also set lots of features in here. You can set a countdown timer and say, I want this breakout room to close after 10 minutes. So you could say, all right, students, I'm going to put you guys into breakout rooms. I want you to talk about this, and then you're going to come back. And I'm gonna give you 3 minutes on the clock. So they'll get 3 minutes. They'll see a countdown clock after 60 seconds, and when it's done, it'll bring them all back together. So breakout rooms can be a great way to sort of work collaboratively as you go through. And so what you'll see when I click on assign is that when I click assign, a list of all the names of the people in my breakout room are there, and I just check the boxes, and that's how I put them into the breakout rooms. So the last real big piece that I want to go through is the preferences. And I'm just going to take a few moments to talk about this. So if you go up to Zoom, and remember at the beginning, I talked about preferences. Well, when you get preferences, you'll see these are the choices that come up. And I put in some screenshots to help us through this a little bit. So you'll think about, like, if I want to adjust the chat, or I want to do a virtual background or a general, all those types of things. Well, under the general, remember, you can use dual monitors, and that's where you get to see those separate screens. So again, that's where it's going to be, is under general. The other thing you're going to see is at the bottom of general is this view more settings, and that's really important because you can change a lot of settings, but you have to do it in your web browser. So even though Zoom has a lot of preferences built in, there are a lot of preferences that will be online. So I just wanted to pull up, like, for screen share, here are a couple of the things. Like, you can have it set so that you can scale to fit the window within the Zoom window, so that you don't, so that it doesn't go full screen. Here's where you can set side-by-side mode. So if I go back again here, you would have to go down under screen share, and then under screen share, that's where side-by-side mode is. Under virtual background, you can set a virtual background. Now you'll see in some cases, you might not have a computer that can handle virtual background. And while I see lots of folks using it, there are some minimum requirements. So if you see that your computer doesn't meet those requirements, you can't use that. And also, just remember that using a virtual background uses a lot of processing power. So it's really going to make it so that your computer may have some issues in terms of how much processing power it's going. And then finally, when you hit the advanced settings, this is where you're going to go online, and you're going to see all the information about your room. So one thing you may want to check is your capacity, which you can see I have 300 people that are allowed in this room. And that might be important if you have a large group that's going to meet, but then you have all these other settings that you can work through. So profile is where you can change a lot of your stuff, but most of the things that I want to do are going to be under the meeting options. So under the meeting options, and here's one of the ones that I really, really like. So now that I have to let people into my room, I need to get an audio signal that somebody has entered the room. And so here, again, under preferences in advanced, I can set it to play a sound when the participants join or leave, and it will only be heard by me. So somebody just tried to join the room. You shouldn't have heard anything, but I got a little ding. Oh, I got to go let somebody into my room. This is also where you have to go to allow file transfers in the chat. So if you want to go into the chat and be allowed to enter files in there, you have to enable that. And you can see it's just a toggle on/off switch. This is also where you can allow co-hosts to have the same controls. You can allow for remote control access, and you can edit your waiting room so that you can see, like where I had my little logo in, you have to go online, and that's where you do those types of pieces. So as I wrap up our talk here for today, and we've gone a little bit longer than some of the others, Zoom is really a powerful tool. There's a lot of things that you can do in there. And so I would just remind you that what you want to do is definitely practice and go into the settings. The settings have a lot of tools, and you have to go in there often. So anytime you update, you probably want to go into your settings and you want to look and see if you can change those types of things so that you just get a good list of what's going on there. Now, finally, here are some other tips and tricks just for yourself. I've tried to look, my camera is up here as I point there, but my window where people are is typically down here. So I don't want to look down here. I generally want to look up at my camera. You also want to look in the background to see what else might be going on there and remind others to do that. And then you want to, at the end, you want to end the meeting for all so that you know that everybody goes out of that meeting so that you're not accidentally leaving anybody in that room, okay? And then finally, don't post your Zoom room on websites. If you post them on websites, that allows others to see them and say, oh, I might try and join into that room. The final piece is that if you're looking for our schedule, if I jump over to the LearnOn site, you'll see that here was today's. We have sort of lessened some of the content. Tomorrow we'll be talking about PDFs and creating and modifying PDFs and creating forms from them. We also have an Ed Puzzle one tomorrow. As you look at the schedule, what you'll see is that if it says LIU 12 LearnOn, generally that's myself or Nicole. And if you see it saying something else by Discovery Ed, you'll know, or Mozile, those are vendor webinars from some of our partners that are offering them. Just one quick note, we're only offering Act 48 credit on LearnOn webinars. So that's where you go to check that out. And then finally, we'd ask you to complete the evaluation by going here to that bit.ly, and I will just quickly pop that into the chat for you. And then we also, at the end, you will not be redirected today to that Act 48 site. So instead, you will have to manually go over there, and I'll put that into the chat as well if you want Act 48 credit. So those two links are now in there, and so that gives you the opportunity to do anything you want. So with that, I'll just I'm going to stick around for just a moment and see if anybody has questions. And what I'm going to do is now I'm going to allow you to unmute yourself. So if you want to ask your question, you can. If you want to put it in the chat, you can do that as well. But with that, that's the end of the webinar. I thank you guys very much for attending here today and look forward to seeing you on our next webinar.
I was just wondering, is there a way to create like a password, I guess, for participants to get into the meeting?
There is. And so what you would do is I'll just jump back. When you go in here to the main settings, so if you go into settings, so let me get to that screen first. So if you go into Zoom and preferences, and then you click on more settings. When you go online, it allows you to create um, a password for that meeting.
Thank you.
Sure. So I see Amy popped a question in there. Just to be sure, at the end of some of my meetings, this is update Zoom now. That's really Zoom, yeah. And so typically after a meeting is done, that's when they know that you're about to quit out of the application. They want you to update it, and so that's what you definitely want to update then. And then that update will take place for the next meeting that you have. Typically, it will close Zoom and reopen it. Anybody else have questions? Okay, well, with that, I'm going to close my room here in just a moment, and um, I'll look forward to seeing you guys hopefully on our next webinar series. Have a good day, folks.